This week on Painting Lines.
Thiem was actually the first player born in the 90s to win a Grand Slam.
Whoa. So do you think at this point in his career, people are expecting him to win a Grand Slam? It's like it's only a matter of time, right?
Welcome to the Painting Lines podcast, your one-stop shop for all things tennis. Join Erik and Aidan in their discussion for updates on news and pop culture, and from hot takes to betting, they've got you covered.
Ready? Welcome back to Painting Lines. Last week, we gave a recap of the Madrid Masters, and this week, after the announcement of his retirement, we felt that it would be suitable to do a player spotlight on Dominic Thiem. So, Erik, this is a guy that really gives a great example of someone whose career is a massive what if. So, do you have any initial thoughts about him and his career overall?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm pretty upset that he's retiring because, like, even though we haven't really seen mint condition Dami team in the last couple years, at least we had the comfort of him still being on tour and playing these matches and just holding on to maybe like the slightest chance of a comeback for him, like at least having that possibility. So now knowing that he's retiring for sure, it's a little sad. You're gonna miss him. He was someone that would go head to head with the big three, very scrappy, intense player. And then just his ability to change direction with his backhand. Like while we were prepping for this episode, I was watching all of his highlights, and it's just amazing with the amount of speed that he can just rip backhands down the line, especially with that one hander. And then the last thing I'm going to say about him is just the fact that he was or he still is, because he hasn't officially retired yet. 2024 is going to be his last year, but he's a classy player. Like you never heard anything bad about him. You never heard players on tour accusing him of cheating or not playing with the best etiquette. He wasn't an explosive temperament. So gonna miss Dami. Those are a little bit of my thoughts. And then of course his gorgeous one-handed backhand.
Yeah, 100%. And in terms of the personality, it kind
Mhm.
of to me seems almost like a precursor to Team or precursor to Rude, where it kind of seems like they were the same type of guy, big, cool personality, and really great on clay.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I heard actually. So, someone nicknamed Dami Team the Prince of Clay because Nadal is the King of Clay. So
Yeah.
maybe Casper can kind of fit into that role pretty soon here.
The Duke of
If
Clay.
he's
I
not
don't know.
losing, yeah, if he's not, yeah, the Duke, exactly, the Count. He's
Yeah,
not losing to
exactly.
Kitsmanovic.
Yeah, that was crazy, but
I
we'll
know.
talk about that probably next week in our recap.
Yeah. Yeah.
But let's just jump right into his career. So, Team turned pro in 2011 when he was 17 years old. And what's interesting about Team's career is that he really showed a great example of consistently developing for the first few years of his career, but didn't really break out until 2014. And I think that's interesting because you see some guys like Alcaraz where they just explode onto the scene. And that wasn't necessarily the path that Team saw.
Yeah, I wonder if it's kind of discouraging to take, a few years to ramp up because back in that time, it is normal for 17-year-olds to go pro. And I'm actually reading the Roger Federer book right now, and he kind of experienced the same thing where it took 2 years to really break out, where he beat Sampras in that in Wimbledon. And yeah, it's like you said, I wonder, we have all these players right now who are just kind of exploding on, but different players develop at different paces. So,
100%.
at least he stuck with it because I know some people after a few years of losing that young, you're maybe like, hey, maybe I should go to college, pick a new profession, maybe not try to hit a ball with a racket as my career.
Yeah, you can
Uh,
definitely get discouraged.
yeah.
But yeah, so jumping into the 2014 season when he kind of had that breakout, he went up. So he was just outside the top 100. He was at 137, and then he jumped up and went inside the top 40. So obviously, that's a massive leap. He was the youngest player in the top 50, so still was obviously very early in his career and had a lot of potential. And one of the standout things from this year was that he actually beat Wawrinka in Madrid, and Stan had just won the Australian Open that year. So this was obviously a massive win for him and kind of showed that he had that top level ability. And it kind of, to me, stands out kind of like a Morojan win from last year, where you see this name and I feel like at that time, people were like, oh, this guy can beat these top guys. That just shows that he has that top level ability.
Yeah, it's a statement match for sure. And at least he was like easing into what we'll see in the future with the win over Wawrinka. Because like I said earlier, he goes head to head with the big three, and even
Exactly.
even Murray too.
Yeah, and I heard a interesting comparison about Thiem and Wawrinka actually was that these are two guys that on their day were as good, if not better, than any of the big three, but weren't necessarily able to keep that level consistently.
Hmm. Would you put Dimitrov on that level or in that category too?
Well, Dimitrov is interesting because I feel like he was at a level where he probably could compete with the big three and could beat other people very consistently on his day, but wasn't necessarily if he was on his day, if he was playing well and the one of the big three that he was against was playing well, he was still probably going to lose. If
Mm-hmm.
Thiem was playing well and his opponent was, he could still beat them.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
But yeah, so moving on to 2015, his progress kind of continued. He broke into the top 20 and he actually won 3 titles that year. So he's like fully established himself as a top guy. And it was fully known at this point that he was going to be a top 10, top 5 level guy. And then continuing into 2016, his career continued to kind of build on that steady trajectory. He made the French Open semifinals for the first time, where he unfortunately lost to Djokovic. And this kind of kicked off a little bit of a pattern where the French Open was clearly his best of the slams. He was obviously a great clay court player, but he did have a little bit of struggles playing against Djokovic and Nadal at this stage of a Grand Slam here. But this was actually the first year he also qualified for the year-end finals and was the year-end number 8. A cool thing actually was he did get a win there, so that's a positive feeling for him getting a win over another top 8 guy. But because sometimes you see a guy like Rublev last year who made the year-end finals and then goes 0-3, and that's just I feel like it's got to feel bad because even though you're like I made it here, I'm established as a top guy, you're like I couldn't actually beat any of the top guys while I was here.
Yeah. What do you think it was that made Dominic Thiem such a great clay player? Because from what I gathered with him, he's just very aggressive and powerful, and I feel like that doesn't always translate to clay.
Well, I think when you have an aggressive game, it sometimes can work on clay because when you're playing against guys that are kind of sitting back a lot of the time and spinning the ball, if you play aggressive enough, you can maybe take the ball in. It's coming in a little bit slower. You can take your chances on the ball and try to step into it. If you're playing on like grass, it's very much like one player gets momentum in the point and then it's over because it's really hard to regain that from the defensive position
Hmm.
with the ball coming so fast. I think on clay, you have more opportunities to maybe step into a ball that's coming with a little bit more of a loopy path.
Yeah, yeah, good point. And you can see it too, because sometimes when he's hitting his one-handed backhand, if he's going cross court, he'll hit a big, loopy, heavy topspin backhand, and then the next point just switch it flat hard down the line. Like he's able to do both.
Yeah, and I think that mix up probably is one of
Hmm.
the ways he was able to be successful on clay.
Hmm. For sure. The Prince.
Exactly. But yeah, so that year he also collected 4 more titles. But moving on to 2017, debuted in the top 5 for the first time. Made the 4th round, actually all of the Grand Slams. So finally was really showing that hey, I can consistently be this level of guy because we see it a lot with guys today that yeah they'll make the let's talk about Rude for example. He makes the whatever the final of the French Open last year and then loses super early at Wimbledon.
Hmm.
So he has that top level on some surfaces, but doesn't have the consistency. Thiem here showed that he can play at a super high level on all of the surfaces, which I think is a standout quality to have.
So do you think at this point in his career, people are expecting him to win a Grand Slam? It's like it's only a matter of time, right?
I think he was kind of in that boat because this is still 2017.
True.
Federer's at the height of his power off of his comeback year.
Mhm.
Nadal is coming back and playing really well. Djokovic is actually out right now in 2017, but uh, still, Thiem is showing, yeah, I can play at this level, but I think people still have that mindset like no one can beat the big three right now. And so people probably thought he had that level, but they probably felt he had to get a little lucky in order to do that, and kind of avoid having to play them. But a big highlight from this year was he actually beat Murray in Madrid to reach the final in Madrid. So that's a Masters 1000 final and a win over the current world number one at that point. Fortunately, he lost to Nadal in the final, but then he actually beat Nadal later in the season on clay in Rome. And that was actually an interesting thing about Thiem was that he was a guy that in some circumstances could beat Nadal on clay, and he beat him multiple times on clay. It wasn't like, oh, the rare chance where Federer beats Nadal on clay. It was like if you had Thiem and Nadal playing, it was actually like a competitive, oh, this could go either way.
I agree. This might be a hot take, but I think Thiem and Nadal on clay was a better rivalry than Federer and Nadal on clay.
On clay,
Like at
yeah,
least more of a matchup.
I think, yeah, it's definitely, in my opinion, yeah, I
Uh-huh.
agree, a closer sort of comparison of level. Because we've talked about their head-to-heads in the past. If you look at Federer versus Nadal on clay, it's like 17-2 or something like that. If you look at
Yeah.
Thiem versus Nadal on clay, I want to say it's like 3-5 or something like that. I'm not
It's
100%
six to
sure.
nine. 6-9.
Exactly. Yeah, so
It's
very
very
competitive
competitive.
on clay.
And you also see it too. Like, granted, these are highlights, but you don't really see Nadal visibly frustrated much in a match. But in those highlights, you're watching him play against team. You can really see he just looks frustrated. Like he doesn't know kind of how teams even getting to these balls, and just kind of like that goes to show how scrappy team is that he's able to get under Nadal's skin and frustrate him.
Exactly. And especially on clay where Nadal usually is so comfortable.
Right, right. But yeah, no, you said at this point he makes his top five debut. I also have the question: do you think it's more? I think we've talked about this before, but is it more of an accomplishment to reach world number one or to win a Grand Slam? And at this point, is he thinking, okay, world number one, or is he thinking Grand Slam?
It's a tough one. It's
It's
so
tough.
it's so odd because you look at the guys that have been world number one and you kind of assume
Mm-hmm.
they've won a Grand Slam. It's not always the case, but I think the comparison you have to make is Goran Ivanisevic won Wimbledon, I want to say in 2002 or something like that. And Marcelo Rios was the world number one. Which
Yeah,
of those two guys
never.
would you rather be? One of them won a Grand Slam, one of them was world number one. I think either way, you kind of have to be a tennis fan to know who they are. But
Mm-hmm.
if you've done both, then you kind of almost break out of that tennis sort of uh, tiny sphere that you're locked in, and people outside of the tennis world can kind of know who you are. People kind of know about Sinner a little bit, even if they're not a big fan of tennis. People know about
Mm-hmm.
Alcaraz, even if they're not a big fan of tennis.
Oh yeah.
I mean, Sinner hasn't been world number one yet, but it seems like he's clearly on that path this year.
Right. I think with Djokovic losing in Rome very early, I think he's now the center might be the unofficial number one. I saw like what he needs to do to secure it. But
After this tournament, that's kind of surprising given the fact that he isn't playing in this tournament.
yeah, no, we got to look into it. I did see something about him being an unofficial number one.
Well,
But
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean,
mhm,
especially going into next week, where obviously we have the French Open, or not next week, but when the French
mhm.
Open does start, Djokovic loses all the points he got for winning
Yeah,
that last year. He
right.
drops down significantly, and all of a sudden, Sinner, who actually also lost relatively early last year to
Mhm,
who was it, Altmaier, in like
mhm,
the first or second, I want to say the second round. All of
mhm.
a sudden, he didn't gain that many points from the French Open last year, and Djokovic got a lot of points for winning it. So that's going to have a massive swing on the rankings there. So definitely going to set Sinner up well for that taking that number one spot.
Yeah, yeah. And then one more thing just about rankings and Grand Slams. So I think I think it was going to be more common back then to be number one without winning a Grand Slam because you had the big 3/4 kind of monopolizing Grand Slams. Whereas now everything's kind of up for grabs. So I feel like you'll have more people. You won't have a number one, a world number one that hasn't won a Grand Slam. That may be a crazy take, but that's kind of the way I'm seeing this right now. Like I don't see, I don't know, Zverev becoming world number one. Like I think it's for right now, Sinner, Alcaraz, Djokovic,
Yeah,
Medvedev.
I think we're looking at, you're right. I think in terms of Zverev would have to probably win a Grand Slam to become the world number one.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's probably the similar likelihood there. It's like
Yeah.
if he can win the Grand Slam, then he can become world number one. But the likelihood of either of those things happening is not super high based on what we've seen.
Right. All
But yeah,
right.
making
Back.
a comment on Thiem's overall career at this point, I wanted to just say that while I've been describing it, I really just noticed that his trajectory was so consistent and just so much straight up, it seemed like, because he followed this pattern of like, okay, slowly doing better and better at the Grand Slams, being more consistent, beating more and more top guys, didn't explode onto the scene, like I said, but just had this really consistent growth. And that's one reason I think the injuries he faced later on are even more sad because his, like I said, his career trajectory was straight up, it seemed like, for his entire career. And then the injuries just completely derailed that.
Yeah, I know. Usually I mean, I feel like recently you kind of have the explosion onto the scene. You kind of establish yourself first, like get that, and then get the injuries. But I feel like team was still kind of if peaking, if not at his peak, where the injuries kind of settled in for sure. Like, without these injuries, he could have gone even more accomplished. It's
Yeah.
kind of obvious, but
Yeah. I mean, one interesting thing is actually we're seeing injuries kind of stack up with these top guys right now. I mean,
mhm.
look at Sinner, look at Alcaraz. I hope they're going to be okay, but you don't know with how injury prone a player can be and how much that can impact their career. I mean, obviously, we're talking about how Thiem's career got derailed. Look at Alcaraz. Is Alcaraz going to be able to consistently stay healthy for his career and be at that top level? Or are these injuries going to start to add up where he doesn't recover fully from one injury when he comes back and then another one stacks on top of it? And I don't know. We'll see what happens, but knock on wood that he stays healthy and stays when he stays at
Yeah,
the top.
yeah, I know. Well, speaking of injury, whose career does this mostly remind you of? Wrist injury, Grand Slam.
I mean, I know
Come
Murray's
on.
career.
How about Del Potro?
Oh, yeah, Del
Someone
Potro
like
for
Del
sure.
Potro, exactly.
That's a great example. Yeah, because Del Potro also won that US
Hmm.
Open. I think a tough thing about Del Potro though is that team was, like you said, at his kind of peak, and Del Potro, it seemed like, was still a rising star, hadn't fulfilled his potential yet, and never really got to see the full potential of his game. Even though obviously he did win a Grand Slam, which is massive,
Hmm.
he didn't get to see that top five, just kind of consistent level of being like a top player.
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely.
But yeah, getting back to Thiem. So in 2018, he actually added coach Galo Blanco to his team. And this, I don't know how it necessarily impacted him massively in 2018, but I think it did help him later on. Uh, in 2018, he kind of stayed at a pretty similar level to where he did in 2017. A big win this year was he beat Nadal on clay in Madrid and actually ended Nadal's 21 match win streak on clay, which is pretty insane.
Whoa.
And the craziest part was Nadal actually had a 50 set win streak. So Nadal had, which was a record. He hadn't lost a set on clay for the past 50 sets he'd played, which was insane because obviously with the Grand Slam, you have that extra set that gets added on there.
Jeez. That is the craziest stat I've heard so far.
Yeah,
Is
pretty
that peak
nuts.
Nadal? Is that peak Nadal?
2018
2018?
is, I don't know if it was his
Yeah,
best
what?
year, but it was a he was on a crazy streak from clay. I think it kind of came over from
Hmm.
2017 too. So
Right.
that's probably why it wasn't like his best year, is just because like it was kind of combining 2 years. But in terms of like just a level on clay, like no one was really obviously beating Nadal other than
Yeah.
Thiem did here. But
No, it's a good
uh,
thing the clay season isn't longer because then Nadal
yeah,
would just be even freaking more dominant.
yeah, it is funny how it's like the seasons are like hard court for a decent amount, clay for a decent amount, grass back to hard again.
Yeah.
It's like the
Yeah, I
grass
know.
season is so short.
I
If like
know.
if you're like a grass court I mean, you look at someone like Eubanks last year. Eubanks did
Hmm.
all of his great stuff in that really short grass season. He
Hmm.
hasn't been that great, to be honest, since that last year's grass season. But what he did last year on grass was really impressive.
I know. Yeah.
And he actually made his first Grand Slam final this year, team, at the French Open. Lost to Nadal, unfortunately, but like I said, there's a pattern here. He makes these runs at the French Open and doesn't necessarily get it done. Then in 2019, he actually won his first Masters 1000 title, and he beat Federer in the final at Indian Wells. One interesting thing about this is that Federer was this match away from winning the Sunshine Double in 2019. If he had
Wow.
won this match, he did go on to win Miami. So that would have been the most recent Sunshine Double. Now it still remains obviously Federer in 2017, but really impressive. Federer won Indian Wells like 5 times, I think. So obviously he was very comfortable there, and the fact that Thiem was able to get it done over him is obviously a massive deal.
Yeah, no kidding. And it wasn't even on a clay court either.
Yeah, exactly. A massive, yeah, 1,000 title here on
So
hard
this
court.
is interesting. He actually had a 5-2 record against Federer.
Yeah, I know.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's crazy to look at a guy like that and be like, oh wow, he was able to dominate this guy that dominated everyone else.
Hmm.
He also made his fourth consecutive semifinal at the French Open this year, and he actually in that semifinal he beat Djokovic in this epic 5-set match that actually went over 2 days. So crazy match. Beats Djokovic and then loses to Nadal in the final again. So really unfortunate there. He was also the ATP Finals runner-up, and in the ATP Finals, he beat Djokovic and Federer in consecutive matches in the group stage. So massive wins there. Unfortunately, he lost to Tsitsipas in the final. Battle of the two
Jeez.
one-handers there, but still
Yeah.
obviously showing that he is a top level guy and maybe a successor to the big three.
Yeah. Imagine beating Djokovic and Federer in the ATP finals and then in the app, like the final, losing to Tsitsipas. That just kind of puts
Yeah,
a damper on things. And
100%.
it kind of reminds me of Sinner this year, right? Having the big win against Djokovic earlier on, but then going on to lose to him in the finals.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only difference there is just that like Sinner wasn't Sinner was still kind of rising. He wasn't like always in the top 5 for
Hmm.
all of 2023,
Hmm.
whereas Thiem was like fully just like established. He's this top guy that's been here for the entire time.
Right. No, yeah, I guess I just more so meant like having a great tournament, but then not finishing it
Yeah,
off in the finals.
yeah.
But
I see
I,
the relation there in the ATP finals for sure.
yeah. So you want to jump back into the team?
Yeah, so in 2020, finally got his breakthrough. Obviously, it was a COVID season, which made it weird. Tournaments got moved to later in the year because of quarantines and stuff. But he finally got his breakthrough, won the U.S. Open, and some people give this U.S. Open an asterisk in terms of Nadal and Federer didn't play. Djokovic was ejected after he had that uh,
Mm.
umpire incident where he hit the ball at the umpire. I mean, I don't think he hit the ball at the
Yeah.
umpire, but he hit the ball and then it hit the umpire and then he got ejected.
So
But
unlucky.
a really crazy fact that I saw from this win is that Thiem was actually the first player born in the 90s to win a Grand Slam.
Whoa.
Yeah, there was an
All right.
entire generation of players that were just shut out by the big three
Jeez.
because if you go back to, I think the last person to win a Grand Slam outside of Murray, Wawrinka, or the Big Three was Cilic in 2014,
Yeah.
and he was born in 1988.
Oh
And
my
then you look
God.
at like Thiem and you're like, okay, this dude was born in the 90s. And then I think probably Medvedev is
Yeah,
the
that's
only other guy
Medvedev.
born in the 90s. So only like two guys born in the 90s have won a Grand Slam, I think.
Yeah, and then Sinner Alcaraz
Yeah, in the
2000s, right?
2000s, exactly.
Jeez.
That
All right,
entire
so
generation got cut out.
yeah, I mean, even though this Grand Slam may have an asterisk, quote unquote, at least he still has that stat.
Yeah,
First
exactly.
player born in the 90s.
Which is just so crazy to think that it took until 2020 for that to happen.
I know. And I personally don't agree with the asterisks. Like, I know the people can make that argument with exactly what you said, but he still went through a very solid tournament, and that match beating Zverev was just incredible comeback too. So
Yeah.
like it shows he's still like he was mentally able to compete too. It wasn't just a skill
Yeah,
thing.
I think also like you said, it wasn't like he had this crazy easy draw. He had to play
No.
tough opponents throughout the tournament, and he probably played like the best people he really could outside of like the big three because they
Hmm.
weren't there.
Yeah, Medvedev, Deminar, just to name a couple.
Yeah,
Obviously Zverev in the final.
rising star FAA too.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, then in 2021 is really when the injuries started to take an impact on his career. Started to pile up. First, he got a knee injury, and then later he had that wrist injury, which is really what's been impacting for him for the rest of his career, and why he said he's kind of retiring at this point is because he said his wrist just isn't where he feels it needs to be to compete at the highest level.
Hmm. I wonder if it had something to do with his stroke and like the strings, the racket, the weight, the tension, and the way he's hitting like, with topspin. Like if there was something that could have been prevented, maybe like if it was catching it earlier on, switching the racket or changing up the stroke. I don't know because obviously he's played forever, so I feel like just the repetitive overuse of that wrist just kind of blew it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just exactly what
Hmm.
you're talking about. Like, there's probably some aspect of just you play tennis for a long time, you're gonna have some
Hmm.
damage to your wrist, your shoulder, that type of thing. I mean, you talk about like an NFL quarterback. I know that Drew Brees has said that he can barely throw a ball now.
Oh,
It's like he threw footballs for 20 years at the highest
yeah.
level, and now his shoulder's just completely gone. He can barely throw a
Yeah.
ball because you just use that same motion over and
Hmm.
over again. Eventually, it's just going to break down. And maybe you're right. Maybe that's kind of what happened here. And also,
Hmm.
probably an aspect of like, it's really hard to take time off to let that fully recover
Hmm.
because you always want to come back, you want to push it, but sometimes you just have to take the time and let it fully recover.
Yeah, unfortunate.
Yeah. And then with that wrist injury, kind of the last few years, 2022 to this year, he's had mixed results. He's fallen pretty far down in the rankings, come back up to like around the top 100. He's had flashes of really high quality. I mean, he made the final in the Austrian Open last year, right before the U.S. Open. I remember that kind of built into me betting on him beating Ben Shelton early in the
Yeah.
U.S. Open, which obviously was not the right pick there, but
I know.
just really a bummer because obviously he had that top level and now he's retiring pretty young for today's standards 30. I mean, if you look at if this was 2004, him retiring at 30 wouldn't be as big of a deal, but in modern times it's like you expect a player to play to at least like 35.
Yeah, right. And like you said, the mixed results in the last couple of years, it was just sad seeing him lose to 500 ranked players and challengers, like random people that you never even heard of. And I think now he's kind of decided, okay, I'm gonna go out on my own terms. I'm done losing in challengers or losing first round or not even qualifying for grand slams.
Yeah, I think you really, really have to love just competing, even if it
Hmm.
is losing, to keep playing right now for him because yeah, he's not seeing the results that he expects of himself based on the level that he's shown in his career.
Yeah, maybe he's maxed out too. I mean, he did win a grand slam. He has a very accomplished career. I wonder if he never won that US Open or that even the Masters 1000 if he would just be more inclined to try, like keep trying. Because we
Mm.
have these players like Dimitrov, for example, who's, setting new expectations for someone who's kind of like coming back. Like he didn't have that Masters 1000 since what was it, 2017
Yeah.
before this year. So
Yeah.
like maybe we could have seen something like that. I don't know. That's kind of wishful thinking.
Yeah. I mean, it's really tough to say what's going through his mind right now. We don't know how his wrist is. We don't know what his mindset is, but it is sad to see him kind of retiring here.
I wonder what kind of career he'll have post tennis. If he'll get into coaching, if he's just, I'm done with tennis, like a kind of a Nick Kyrgios type where he wasn't really loving it by the end. I wonder if he'll be on the tennis channel, be a broadcaster, who knows?
Yeah.
Start a start a fashion brand
Yeah.
or a shoe brand
Yeah.
like Federer.
Or yeah. Yeah. The fashion brand, I think,
Everything.
is what, Borg, right?
Yeah, Borg.
Yeah.
um,
Uh, but yeah, so overall, just some comments. Like you said, a pretty impressive career when you take a step back and look at it. 17
mhm,
titles, Masters 1000, and a Grand Slam. And like we were talking about with the big three, he holds at least 5 wins over all of the big three, which is a lot of wins, obviously.
yeah.
Like, not many guys have done that outside of the big three beating each other like that.
Mhm. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on how he retired? Because you know, Schwartzman just did the same thing where he said, "Okay, I'm going to play the rest of 2024." I feel like this is going to be the new trend of how players will retire. It won't be just a split second, like instantaneous. So after this tournament, or just announced right before. It'll be, I'm going to finish out the year. That way, you kind of put a hard stop on it. And I feel like we're going to see the same thing with Nadal, same thing with Murray, Djokovic. They'll give a end of the year, and they'll say, "This is when I'm going to retire."
Yeah, well, I mean, Murray, I think, has kind of said that, not
Mm-hmm.
end of the year, but he said he may not play after this summer. So he may be looking at Wimbledon as his last tournament.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I think there's honestly a better way for guys to retire rather than just being like, this is my last tournament. I'm retiring right now.
Yeah.
Because I think there is a positive of having like, okay, hey guys, I'm going away. So kind of almost say goodbye to watching me play.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you just retire out of nowhere, people don't get to watch your last matches. They don't get to watch these things. If you give yourself sort of a runway to retiring, people are going to be like, "Oh, I want to watch this match because it could be Schwartzman's last match. I want to watch this match because it could be Team's last match."
Yeah, exactly. And you also risk, because I'm pretty sure this happened with Monfils, but you risk that like you having just your best second half of the season, or right before your retirement, you're like, maybe I shouldn't retire. But it's like a tease. It's something that keeps you going just long enough to like want to come back. But then again, even if you finish out your career, you're on a high note, you're like, all right, let me just stop there because it could get ugly if I just keep playing.
Yeah.
Like, who knows? What if we see another team resurgence?
Yeah, I mean, and also like if in a year's time he comes back and is like, "Hey, my wrist is feeling so much better," he can always come out of
Mhm.
retirement. People do that all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, he can play doubles or something.
Yeah, I think also one thing is that like when you retire, there's no pressure on you for a comeback. Like if you look at
Uh-huh.
someone like Kyrgios, like every single time it's like, "Oh, is he coming back? When's he coming back?" And there's so much pressure constantly in the media about, "Okay, when are you getting back? When are you getting back?" When you're retired, there's no pressure on you. There's
Mhm.
no timeline. You have to be back soon. It's like you're gone, you're retired, and then if you decide you want to make a comeback, you can try to make a comeback. But there, you can do it whenever you feel like you want to do that. You don't have to like try to force it.
Right. No, exactly. That's a good point. But yeah, I mean, kind of were you surprised? I can't say I was surprised. Like when I heard the news, I was like, kind of saw it coming, but surprised that it was just out of the blue, if that makes sense. Like it wasn't after a notable loss or a big win or something. It was just kind of like, all right, I'm gonna make this announcement on a Thursday
Yeah,
afternoon or
exactly.
something,
Yeah, I
like
kind
with a
of
video.
feel exactly the same. Yeah, it's like it
Yeah.
wasn't that shocking when I heard the news, but I was kind of
Mhm.
like surprised just by the timing, like you said.
Yeah, it wasn't okay, but all right. Well, good episode on team. This guy just going through this and listening and talking about all of his accomplishments and everything. I mean, we're gonna miss him. Definitely gonna miss him on tour.
For sure. For sure. Alrighty, you
All
ready to
right.
hop into segments?
Yeah, let's do it. So this one was pretty interesting. So I saw that Djokovic will be undergoing medical tests on his head after the water bottle incident in Rome. Said it could have potentially affected his match against Tabilo. So a little background for those of you that didn't know what happened this week. So after his first round match, he was signing autographs in the tunnel, kind of right where you walk in and out of the court. And a fan reached over and a big, heavy aluminum water bottle, assuming filled with water, just fell out of the bag and hit Djokovic right on the top of the head. And he immediately dropped. It looks pretty painful. And he said that he suffered bleeding, he was nauseous, he had a headache, but he would be good to go for his match. And um, he actually showed up with a helmet on, kind of making a joke. It was pretty funny. So he's got a great sense of humor. He took it in stride. And but then he proceeded to get absolutely rolled by Tabilo, which is uncharacteristic. The score was 6-2, 6-3. And in his press conference, he just said he felt off, his balance felt off, his strokes weren't there. And, he doesn't know if this was the reason because people asked about it, but it could definitely be a possibility and that he's going to get it checked out. So I personally think that that could have had a huge impact. I don't think he had a concussion per se, but I think it was definitely, something threw him off there. And I don't know. I can't imagine being that fan who did that to
Yeah.
Djokovic, right? Like
Yeah.
that
I
is that is crazy.
I think that maybe not to disagree with what you said, but I think
Hmm.
it may have been a concussion based on the symptoms he described,
Yeah.
right? Nausea, feeling like
Yeah.
your balance is off. These seem like
Yeah.
classic sort of concussion signs. And maybe it wasn't like a
Hmm.
severe concussion, but like just having a concussion at all can definitely have an impact on how you're able to play tennis, messing with your depth perception, your ability
Right.
to, yeah, like you said, balance. So many things can be impacted by that. And I think everybody's gonna be like, oh, he got hit by a water bottle and now he's blaming that. It kind of seems like people always make an argument that
Hmm.
tries to undermine the biggest guys if they're not a fan of them. People do the same thing with LeBron whenever there's an issue with him. They're like, oh, what a
Yeah.
crybaby. They're probably doing the same
Yeah.
thing with Djokovic right now. But I think that it probably did have an impact. Obviously, if it's an uncharacteristic loss coming after an uncharacteristic event. So
Hmm.
while it's one of those things you can't necessarily say they're caused by each other, but they did happen right after each other. So there may be some impact there, obviously.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think especially like you said, maybe not a full blown concussion, but definitely a minor concussion, like anything that throws you off there. But
Yeah, exactly.
um yeah, that's kind of a bummer, but hopefully he gets better soon, comes back from it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what did you see in the news this week?
So speaking of Murray and his kind of retirement, so obviously he was injured earlier this year, and he's making his comeback now. He's first coming back at a challenger in Bordeaux, and then the Geneva Open. And I just want to say I'm going to be locked in on these matches because, like I said, he may be retiring this summer. So you got to enjoy these last matches from the old dog Murray. And so it's just an update for all the Murray fans out there that want to be to know about his last couple matches.
Yeah, you only have a couple match of the weeks left with him then, huh?
Exactly. Just got to throw him in there every time, even if he gets like beaten 0-0. I'm like, dude, match of the week, Murray. He went and tried his hardest.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of obviously guys who will be retiring soon and just classy players in general, I was watching a highlight and it was after Murray had beaten team, pretty recently, and he just gave him some words of encouragement, like, "Hey, get better soon, mate. It's good to have you back on here. Like, keep your head up." And that just goes to show, like, this is an older player, and Murray went through pretty much the same thing, just kind of coaching up team, like saying, "Hey, get back in there. You'll be all right, man." So
Yeah.
love to see that from another player, especially their competitors. They literally want to beat each other, and it's just nice to see that.
Yeah. It's always crazy too when you see like a guy like Team who, in relation to Murray, Murray was around for literally Team's entire career.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah, and he's outlasting him.
yeah, Murray was there. Team came onto the scene, peaked, got injured, and now is retiring, all while Murray was out there. Like, that's
Wow.
just crazy to see with when like an older guy's career lasts longer than a another guy's full sort of career span.
Yeah, yeah, I know, right? Jeez.
Yeah. So moving on to
Um,
bet of the week. What would you go for this week?
yeah, so I'm taking the Runa Baez match to go over 2.5 sets. That line's at plus 110. It's kind of just looking through the lines this week. They seem pretty far off. I couldn't really find a match that I was really like, oh yeah, this is the one. Um, the individual lines on this, so Rune's minus 200 and Baez is plus 160. I didn't love either one. I do think Runa is the better player, but Baez is no schlep. I think he's very talented and could easily shock Runa. So this is one of the classic matches where I'm seeing just a hard fought tennis match, one that will go the distance, whether it's Runa coming out slow, maybe dropping the first set, but then making the adjustments, winning the second, and then pushing it to a third may or may not win, but at least making it go the distance. That's kind of my thought process. I think this will be a match that I tune into and try to live bet to see if I can get Runa at positive odds. Like if he does go down at any point in the match, because I think he's definitely a player that once he goes down, he's not ruled out. He's still able to forge comebacks.
Yeah. I think this is a match, like you said, I think it could be all over the place. I mean, I could
Yeah.
see Baez coming out real fast and just beating Runa not having any consistency. I could see
Uh-huh.
Runa coming out and playing at a high level and just destroying Baez because I think Runa does have the higher top
Hmm.
level. Or I think it could go like you said, like it could be Runa comes out slow and then like comes back after. Could be that Runa comes out fast and then kind of loses his momentum. There's so many ways this match could go just based on how I know Runa can play and the fact that Baez is a solid clay court player. I was actually considering going for that Baez plus 160 bet
Mm.
because we know that Runa doesn't always have that consistent level. But I ended up instead going for a different clay court player. My bet of the week was actually Tabilo plus 155 over Khachanov.
Ooh.
Obviously, we just saw Tabilo beat Djokovic, and if he can play like he did in that match, I think this could be a win for him. Like Tabilo played very solid against Djokovic, even if Djokovic was off a little bit because of the whole water bottle incident.
Hmm.
And honestly, this whole year has been very solid for Tabilo. I think he got a title earlier this year, like at the beginning of the year. And he's just been a guy that, like, this whole year I've seen consistently like pretty good results. He's had a few big wins. And while this is kind of a pure momentum play, he's got to be brimming with confidence coming into this match against Khachanov after beating Djokovic like that.
Oh yeah, not only beating him, but beating him handedly. And like you said, I think Tabilo is starting to become not a household name, but a recognizable name in the draw. Like I feel like, going back 6, 8 months, you didn't really hear too much about him, but now he's like working his way up the rankings. Hatchenoff is kind of doing the opposite, where he's kind of like he's not really progressing, but he's not going too far down. So I feel like yeah, Tabilo is one of those where at plus 155, I think it's good value.
Yeah, exactly. With especially with that
Yeah.
momentum.
Yeah, I think this will be an interesting week too. I'm pumped for the second week of Rome when the matches get tighter, the lines are going to get tighter, and we're going to see more like heavyweight matchups.
100%. I think this is definitely a tournament where there are a lot of heavyweight matchups, especially just in this next round.
Hmm.
Like I know, I think FAA is playing Deminar, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was one that I was kind of thinking, okay, like FA positive odds. I don't know,
Yeah, I mean,
but
yeah,
he
it's
may
tough
he's
to
just
say.
teasing me.
FAA
I don't want to take
also,
the bait.
yeah, FAA also had a really interesting match last week. I don't want to
Uh-huh.
get too much into it because we're obviously going to give our recap, but
Yeah.
he won that first set, and I think he was down like 5-1 in the second set,
Jeez.
and then
Jeez.
came back and won it in that second set. So
Uh-huh.
obviously his mentality is growing a lot, and definitely a positive sign for him.
Yeah, well, speaking of great matches, let's get into match of the week now.
Sounds good. Sounds good. What'd you go for this week on the match of the
D-
week?
Dude, I went Tsitsipas beating Struff, two guys that I love a lot, and this was just some great tennis all around. I really enjoyed it. It even had a little bit of drama too, because Tsitsipas was broken the first game of the whole match and just smashed his racket, which I feel like you don't see too much from him, especially in the first game
That's
of the whole
crazy.
match. Like you would think, all right, if you're Struff, you're like, damn, all right, I won this match.
Yeah.
This guy, if he's, unless you're Rublev and you're smashing the racket that
Yeah.
early on in the match, I don't know. But anyway, just saw some like big, powerful baseline rallies from these guys. And I was looking at kind of their statues, very similar, both 6'4", 200 pounds, can rip the ball. So we saw some great rallies. The first set was great. It went into a tiebreaker. Struff actually broke early on, but Tsitsipas broke back, forced it to the breaker, lost the tiebreaker, won the second, and then forced it to the third, where he broke him early at 2-2, and then was just in control for the rest of the match. Ended up winning 6-4 the last set. And then, dude, I don't know what it is about Tsitsipas's celebrations at the end of matches, but I kind of love them. Like sometimes they are very awkward or could be goofy, but it just shows how much passion and emotion he plays the game with. Like it's
Yeah.
just so funny. He sometimes acts like he just won a grand slam like
Yeah.
after an ordinary match.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I'm in the camp of the Medvedev celebrations. Like when he won Italy last year and he did that weird little dance.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just so
Well,
funny.
that was
Like,
mocking Tsitsipas, I think, right?
yeah, I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
I think Medvedev just takes it as such a joke, and
Oh, I
Tsitsipas
know.
almost takes it too seriously in the
I
celebration.
know. Well, speaking of celebrations, I feel like Ben Shelton is like he's cool when he does it. He's got
Yeah,
like cool ones where Tsitsipas will like just kind of look like
yeah,
I don't know,
yeah.
not an idiot, but like awkward.
Yeah.
Awkward's the best way to put it.
Yeah. But speaking on this match, I really
Yeah.
felt like this was just such a tough matchup to get so early for both of these guys.
Yeah.
Like we know that Struff is a very solid clay player, and we know that Tsitsipas is a very solid clay player. I think both of these guys could have made a pretty deep run if they were in different parts of the draw.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that they happened to hit each other in the round of 64 here
Yeah.
feels bad. Feels bad for both of them because it just I think if Tsitsipas had lost this match, I wouldn't have been that disappointed in his
Mm-hmm.
result because obviously we know Struff is a very solid clay player. And for Struff to lose here, I'm like, damn, man, that's just tough for you because obviously we know Tsitsipas is a really high level guy too.
Yeah. No, you're right. I always hate seeing that, but it's part of the game.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. What about your match of the week?
Yeah, so my match of the week was a first round match, Darderi defeating Shapovalov 6-7, 6-3, 7-6. And to me, this was a really great example of why overly powerful serving can make matches a little bit less fun to watch. And I think this is why they kind of wanted to make courts slower is matches like these, because there were breaks just all over the place in this match. Starting off the first set, first three games, all were breaks. Shapo was up, but then he ended up losing the break, went to a tiebreak in that set, and Dennis ended up getting it done in the tiebreak. Second set, a little bit less exciting. Darderi kind of just handled business on his serve and wasn't broken. Shapovalov got broken twice in this set, and Darderi won at 6-3. And then the third set was just crazy, all over the place. Shapo was broken to make it 4-2 for Darderi, but then he won the next three games and was actually serving for the match. Then he got broken. It went to a tiebreak, and Shapovalov lost in the tiebreaker. So all over the place. Shapo had chances, Darderi had chances, and in the end, Darderi got it done in that third set tiebreak.
Yeah, that sounds like an intense match. Did you see any one-hander, jumping one-handed backhands on Shapo's part?
I don't remember them, but I'm sure it happened
Yeah,
at some point.
I love those. That's his signature shot.
Yeah, yeah. He gets that extra sort of torque on it. Yeah.
Uh-huh. All right, and that's the show. If you're not already subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube at Painting Lines Podcast. Feel free to shoot us a DM or email us any questions or thoughts at paintinglinespodcast@gmail.com.